It's a stormy night, and in a hotel room, a young couple lies in bed, holding hands as they take a new illegal upper called synchronic. As they wait for the drug's effects to begin, the man leaves the room and takes the elevator. Suddenly, both of them start experiencing strange, vivid hallucinations. The woman, still in bed, sees plants and shrubs appear in the room before the walls fade away, revealing a dense jungle. A tribal man emerges from the greenery, and as he approaches, she notices a snake slithering toward her, causing her to scream in terror. Meanwhile, in the elevator, the man watches as the walls disintegrate, revealing a vast desert landscape. When the elevator floor vanishes beneath him, he plummets onto the sandy ground below. Across town, best friends Steve and Dennis, both emergency paramedics, respond to a call about a potential overdose. When they arrive at a house, they find two people on the floor, and a concerned neighbor tells them she heard strange noises and someone speaking in French. Steve attends to the overdose victim, accidentally pricking himself with a syringe before administering life-saving medicine to revive the girl. As the police arrive, they discover a synchronic wrapper and conclude that the incident is a case of drug-induced violence. While leaving, Steve picks up an old copper coin he finds on the floor, dated 1721, piquing his curiosity. Later, during a break at work, Steve plays golf and examines the coin further. Worried about the syringe prick, he goes to the hospital for an HIV test, where his doctor recommends a full medical checkup. The next day, Steve attends Dennis' family picnic to celebrate Dennis's daughter's birthday. He notices Dennis' eldest daughter, Brianna, sitting alone and decides to check on her, as she views him as the cool uncle. Brianna starts to open up about her struggles, but their conversation is interrupted by a phone call. That night, Steve and Dennis respond to another emergency, this time involving a burned victim. When they arrive, the officers inform them that there are no clear signs of fire nearby, although they did find an empty synchronic wrapper and a melted doorknob. The unusual circumstances leave them puzzled. Soon after, Steve undergoes a brain scan at the hospital and receives devastating news. He has a cancerous tumor in his pineal gland, which could drastically shorten his life. Shaken by the diagnosis, Steve considers telling Dennis but ultimately decides against it. Meanwhile, Dennis, trying to reconnect with Brianna, plays basketball with her and learns that she's just worried about her uncertain future, not facing any major crisis. Later, Steve and Dennis meet at a bar where Dennis gifts Steve a lamp for his birthday and confides in him about his doubts regarding his marriage. Dennis expresses jealousy over Steve's bachelor lifestyle, and the conversation shifts when Dennis confronts Steve about the increasing amount of medication he's been taking, suspecting addiction. However, Steve avoids telling him about the tumor and assures Dennis that he's handling things. The next day, Steve and Dennis respond to a house party where another overdose has occurred. They find one teenager dead and another speaking incoherently. When asked if anyone else was with them, the teen mentions a girl named Brianna. Horrified, Dennis calls his wife and confirms that Brianna is missing. Now that Brianna has fallen victim to synchronic, Steve decides to visit the shop where the drug was purchased. He buys all the remaining synchronic packets, and as he leaves, a man follows him to his car, offering to buy the synchronic for a higher price. Steve refuses and drives away. Meanwhile, Dennis and his wife are frantic, printing flyers and contacting authorities in a desperate search for their daughter. That night, while lying in bed with his dog, Steve hears a noise from the living room. Armed with a bat, he investigates and finds the man from the shop hiding in his closet. Steve threatens him, but the man quickly reveals that he is Dr. Kermani, the creator of synchronic. Kermani explains that he never intended for the drug to cause harm. It was meant to be a fun recreational drug, but it ended up having unintended consequences. Synchronic distorts space-time, allowing users to briefly travel through different time periods. The drug's effects vary depending on the user's pineal gland development. Adults whose glands are fully developed only appear as shadows or ghosts in the past, while younger people with underdeveloped pineal glands can fully travel through time, and even become trapped there. Kermani has been trying to buy back and destroy all the synchronic still circulating, knowing the danger it poses, especially to younger users like Brianna. Steve remains skeptical of Kermani's claims and lies, saying he flushed the remaining synchronic down the toilet. Kermani leaves, believing the drug is gone, but it's revealed that Steve only threw the packets in the trash, still unsure what to do next. The following day, Steve is at his chemotherapy session, and as soon as it's over, the side effects hit him hard, causing him to vomit. At work, Steve is constantly exhausted. Meanwhile, they get another call about a man with a broken leg. When they arrive at the scene, the victim speaks a different language, but they still begin treatment. Dennis starts giving Steve instructions, which irritates Steve, who snaps that he knows how to do his job. Dennis implies that Steve is under the influence of morphine, which escalates into a heated argument. Steve, feeling frustrated, goes home alone. Later that night, Steve takes a closer look at the old coin he found at the crime scene, and the date convinces him to try Synchronic for himself. Within minutes, bright lights fill his living room, and Steve finds himself transported to a swampland as his living room disappears around him. He touches and smells everything, amazed by the reality of it all. From a distance, he spots a man muttering a prayer, but his attention shifts to a crocodile approaching. Trapped between the crocodile and the man, who is revealed to be a Spanish conquistador charging at him with a sword, Steve panics. Just as the sword is about to strike, Steve reappears in his living room, with his dog, Hawking, staring at him in confusion. Steve nearly dismisses the experience as a dream until he notices a slash mark on the floor from the conquistador's sword. Fascinated by what just happened, Steve decides to document the experience on a video camera. He explains that Synchronic seems to transport him back in time for 7 minutes, and he suspects this is what happened to Brianna. Steve takes another dose and is transported to a frozen wasteland where he immediately starts freezing. He collapses as a figure approaches, but before the person can reach him, the 7 minutes are up, and he reappears in his living room, still shivering. Realizing the time period he ends up in depends on where he is in the present, Steve takes another dose, this time wearing a coat and carrying firewood. He reappears in the same frozen landscape, manages to start a fire, and watches as a caveman approaches him, spear in hand. The two men sit by the fire, eyeing each other, until Steve slowly fades back into the present. The following morning, Dennis and his wife argue more frequently as Brianna's disappearance continues to strain their already fragile marriage. Steve, meanwhile, hears on the radio that Dr. Kermani has committed suicide. That night, Steve recalls the various objects they found at previous crime scenes: the copper coin, sword, and doorknob, leading him to believe he can carry things with him through time. He takes another dose of Synchronic, this time embracing Hawking. To his relief, Hawking comes back with him, but they arrive in a time period filled with racist hostility. They land in a house where a man immediately chases them out, and as they flee, everyone in town stares at them with hate. To Steve's horror, when the 7 minutes are up, he doesn't disappear. He rushes back to the house where they first appeared, takes another dose, and sneaks inside. However, the man returns with a group of men in white hoods. Chaos breaks out, and Steve gets separated from Hawking. He grabs onto Hawking's leash just as he's about to be shot, and Steve reappears in the present, but without Hawking. From his window, Steve watches helplessly as Hawking fades away, realizing he can no longer retrieve his dog because he doesn't have enough Synchronic left. Determined to find Brianna, Steve visits the university dorms where she went missing. He tries Synchronic again at the exact spot where she was last seen, but ends up in a forest surrounded by men performing a ritual. Mistaking him for a spirit they've summoned, the men swarm him, and Steve runs back toward his entry point, grabbing a lawn chair to bring himself back to the present. However, one of the teens from the incident reveals that Brianna didn't disappear from that spot, but wandered off. Sometime later, Steve meets Dennis at a bar, and Dennis confesses he might be heading for a divorce. He feels guilty for not being the husband his wife deserves, and admits that Brianna was the only thing keeping their marriage together. Steve surprises Dennis by saying he'd trade his bachelor lifestyle for Dennis' stable marriage any day, before finally revealing his brain tumor. Dennis is upset, but Steve reassures him that he's undergoing chemotherapy. The two reconcile, and Dennis tells Steve that it was the ambulance driver, not Steve, who had been stealing the morphine. Later, Steve shows Dennis video footage proving Synchronic's time-traveling effects. Dennis, worried about Brianna being stuck in the past, realizes that she might have left a clue for them in the present. Steve remembers the small boulder at the park where Brianna sat the day they talked, and when they investigate, they find the word "always" carved into it. This must be where Brianna disappeared, so with only 2 doses of Synchronic left, Steve takes one to go back for her. He ends up in the midst of the American Civil War, with bombs exploding and gunfire all around him. Steve finds a bunker filled with dead soldiers and calls out for Brianna. Crawling through the bodies, he finally hears her voice and reunites with her. He gives Brianna the last dose of synchronic and tells her they must reach the boulder within 7 minutes, or they'll be trapped in the past. As they run toward the boulder, Steve gets shot, forcing Brianna to help him. They're then confronted by a soldier who mistakes Steve for a slave and holds them at gunpoint. Time is running out, and Steve knows he's about to be stuck in the past. In a desperate move, he baits the soldier toward a landmine. Just as the soldier is about to shoot, Brianna disappears, and the mine explodes, killing the soldier. Steve, now alone, sits on the boulder, accepting his fate. In the present, Brianna reappears and reunites with her father. Together, they see Steve's ghostly figure appear on the boulder before fading away, trapped in the past forever. So that's it. Hope you enjoy the story. Follow for more videos.